Welcome to Headlines. This is Ari Wasserman, and I am sitting in for David Lichtenstein. We have an action-packed show today focused primarily on the greatest challenges that women encounter in the workplace, be it a secular workplace or an observant, a Haredi, a Hasidish, a Hamish workplace. But as we will see, the issues that we will discuss today are incredibly relevant to men as well. We are going to cover a whole range of topics, including a frum person attending team building activities. There's a real push nowadays throughout the world, the United States, Israel, to have a team, to build cohesiveness among all members of a company. But what happens to the frum person when that activity is at the beach? Men and women together at the beach or in a bar, at a water park. We're having a balloon toss. On the one hand, it's very important to be a part of the team. It could impact our ability to get a raise and to get a promotion. Not attending at all could inhibit our getting that raise and promotion. But on the other hand, Klal Yisrael has to be different. Am levadad yishkon. We have specialness to us. We have to maintain that separateness. So how do we balance being a part of the team, cohesiveness, but maintaining who we are? We will discuss use of first names when addressing somebody of the opposite gender. Is there a blanket prohibition that a man cannot address a woman by the first name and a woman cannot address a man by his first name? Or does it depend on the workplace? Is that applicable also in the secular workplace? Or is that only relevant in a Orthodox Haredi workplace? Is it reasonable for a woman to expect from herself or her husband to expect from her, or society to expect from her, that she can manage everything, working, raising kids, cooking for Shabbos, and so much more? And then we will move on to the sensitive topic of infidelity in the workplace. Is it a problem amongst the frum? Is it just men? Or is it women as well? And is there a problem in the frum, the Hamisha workplaces? And then we will talk about the prevalent issue of Nivul Peh and Lashon Hara in the workplace. Going into a workplace where the words that we hear are foul, they're expletives, they're words that should not be uttered. Lashon Hara is rampant in the workplace. Obviously, we cannot participate in the Nivul Peh and the Lashon Hara, but what do we do when we are surrounded it? Is there a prohibition to hear it or merely to speak it? I would, before continuing, like to thank Rav David for inviting me to host this week, but that indeed begs the question, why was I asked to host this very riveting and important topic? So just some background. For over 20 years, I have worked in the secular workplace as an attorney, as a business person, in both large, medium-sized, and small companies. And approximately 20 years ago, when I saw that there were challenges for a frum person in the workplace, I started researching both the halachic and the hashkafic issues that I was encountering. I began teaching those issues, and also increasingly I began publishing about those issues. Since moving to Yerushalayim around 10 years ago, I have been teaching classes, courses in a number of the yeshivas and also in seminaries. And then 3 years ago, I published a book called Making It Work, which is the greatest challenges encountered in the workplace. That was a work in English. Before that, I had published a number of works in Hebrew. And based on the feedback from women on that book, Making It Work, I was requested to work on a book specific for the challenges that are encountered by the observant women in the workplaces. So accordingly, my wife Miriam and I, approximately 3 years ago, we got to work researching and writing the new book, Making It All Work, that is all about the greatest challenges encountered by observant women in the workplace, in the frum workplace, in the secular workplace, and indeed those challenges are the subject of our show today. As part of the research for that book, we interviewed 50 women in 5 continents in numerous occupations and industries. And what was fascinating to me is that some of the challenges that they discussed were those that I had experienced as a man in the secular workplace, but many of the issues that they discussed were new and surprising as well. I just do want to mention before continuing that I have no shame. I am happy to promote the books because all of the proceeds go to tzedakah. Now, when it comes to what we will discuss in this show today, it would be impossible to cover all of the challenges experienced by somebody in the workplace. There are too many. So we've pared it back, and we have selected a handful of issues that we will discuss, and we have also chosen a select group of guests to come onto the show and discuss those issues. So to discuss who is going to be here on the show, we are going to start out with a clip from Rav Asher Weiss. So we're going to have a number of clips from him. This was not recorded specifically for the show. When I was writing the book and researching the book, making it all work, a number of issues came up that had not been discussed by the poskim. Rav Asher Weiss was my address. We had a number of conversations in his office. He permitted me to record those conversations, and subsequently he permitted me to play those recordings on the show. So we will hear some of them. The first one is going to relate to interactions between men and women and how a woman should act in the workplace as it relates to men. This is very relevant. Parshas Ba'aloscha, this week's Parsha, there's a pasuk that says, Bocha le'mishbechosav. Chazal make a drasha al iske mishbechos, that when Moshe Rabbeinu informed Klal Yisrael that there are going to be limitations in the relationships that they can have between men and women, it says they cried. They cried about these issues. And in fact, the Rambam says in Hilchos Isurei Bia, Ein lecha davar b'chol Torah kula. There's nothing in the entire Torah shu kasha lo rov am lifrosh that is as difficult for people to separate themselves, ella min harayos v'abios asuros, to separate themselves from relationships, from people that they should not be involved in. So we will hear from the Gaon Rav Asher Weiss on some of those issues. We will then have a wonderful conversation with Rav Yonasan Sachs. He's a renowned posek. He's a great Rosh Yeshiva. He's the longtime Rav of the Aguda in Passaic. We will discuss with him participation in company events, team building activities. We will discuss, as we mentioned, Nivul Peh, Lashon Hara, and we will go on to discuss taking rides together, a man and a woman, a frum man with a woman, a frum woman with a man, or both from together, not married. Even in the absence of yichud, can they take a ride, for example, an Uber ride from the office to a meeting together, or is that inappropriate? We will also have a very important conversation of aseh lecharav. Who should you choose when asking questions about the workplace? Who is an appropriate posek to be paskening on the silas that come up in the workplace? We will then be joined by Dr. Rivka Schwartz. She is an educator, a popular speaker, who will talk about the emotional turmoil often experienced by frum women who have so many competing demands on their time. And we will also talk about the practicality. In addition to the emotional turmoil, the practicality. Is it possible, or is it an impossible task to juggle everything? Work, kids, family, chagim, cooking for Shabbos, maybe even having a guest or two. Then we will introduce Mrs. Elisheva Liss. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, in addition to being an author and a lecturer, and she will talk about her experiences in coaching couples who have unfortunately experienced infidelity in their marriage, oftentimes as a result of infidelity in the workplace, but not exclusively infidelity in the workplace. And unfortunately, we will see that this is a bigger problem than we may otherwise expect. We will also speak with Mrs. Miriam Brillamem. She is the head of human resources for a massive company, Cushman and Wakefield, over 50,000 employees. She will talk about what happens if you're touched in a way you don't like. You get the hug. You feel harassed, verbally or physically. What happens if a man is falsely accused? From a human resources perspective, from a legal perspective, how do we handle all of those issues? And at the end of the show, we have delayed this specifically to the end of the show to hear Rav Yisachar Fran, Divrei Chizuk. We want to hear at the end of the show so we can go out with the Chizuk, hearing from Rav Yisachar Fran. Now, two additional important points. Number one is the focus of the show. The point of this show is awareness of the challenges and preparation for the challenges that are indeed encountered in the workplace. The more we are aware, the more we are prepared, the better equipped we are to deal with the inevitable challenges that we will encounter. Also, another point, and I always tell people this, when it comes to the workplace, you need to expect the unexpected. Things are always coming up. We need a Rav, we need a posek, aseh lecha Rav. That is critical. In addition, as I mentioned at the beginning of this introduction, this is a show primarily about women and their challenges, but it is equally important, if not important, to men. Not only if you have a wife who's in the workplace or a daughter anticipating working, but men have many of the same issues. Even more than that, men often cause the issues for women, and women often cause the issues for men. Okay, as mentioned, we are going to start out now with a clip discussing the interactions and various issues as it comes to male-female interactions by the Gaon Harav Asher Weiss. Here we go. Here is Rav Weiss. When I was speaking with a number of the women, the number one issue that came up is men. That's a very broad category, and oftentimes they think it's men abusing women and hitting on women. That's not that common, meaning it's more the atmosphere, the meeting of the minds, the over time working together. And one of the areas is touching. Now, there's a whole range. I'm going to leave aside the shaking hands, but it's more when you're working with people, invasion of personal space without touching. I listed 5 different variables. He taps me on the shoulder. Not more common, but in addition to shaking hands, now is often you give people hugs. Good morning, and a hug. Casual kisses, and when you tell people, sometimes the number mentioned this, please don't touch me, I'm from, they'll go out of their way to bother you, touching you, or make fun of you and stuff. So the first question based on that background is should a woman up front tell her male coworkers, don't touch me, make a big statement of it, or take it on a case-by-case basis?
Once again, these are very sensitive issues. And it totally depends on the personal circumstances and on the personalities. The reality is that many of our young women work together with men. And it is a necessity. The reality in our society is women need to help provide for their families. Not only financially do they need to help provide for their families, but it is also part of the reality in our day and age that when a woman will feel a void, they won't work. And it has become somewhat of a social norm as well. And I'm not, the Rambam has a line, I don't think there's a point now in speaking in a philosophical way, is it good or not good? It is a fact. Thousands, tens of thousands of young women have careers, and they work hard. And many of them work in an environment in which men are there as well. And let me say something. I think working with Haredi men is just as problematic as working with Chalonim, with non-Frum people, and sometimes even more problematic. Because the common Gentile or the common non-Frum person has enough outlets to raise Yetzer Hara, and out of basic respect won't harass or try to seduce Frum women. From my point where I sit and where I stand, I think there are more problems with Haredi men than with non-Frum, because Haredi men also have a Yetzer Hara. Might be a big chiddush, but the Yetzer Hara is busy with Haredim just as busy as he is with non-Frum, and they do not have many opportunities, and there are many, many problems even in the Haredi environment. So whenever a woman works in close proximity with men, it is always a challenge, and she always needs to be very careful. On one hand, in a workplace you need to be nice to people. And if you're going to be nasty, either you're going to find yourself out, or you're just going to become like a leper in the workplace, and that wouldn't work out. So I don't think a lady that comes into the office, knocks on the table and says, "Nobody dare to touch me, I'm an untouchable," I don't think that is a proper way to go about it. But I think just using basic courtesy and common sense, she will convey the message, that these are my standards, this is my way of life. So the American Vice President, Mike Pence, had no problem, saying out in public for 360 million Americans and for the entire world, "I will not dine with any woman without my wife present. I will not touch any woman besides my wife and my immediate family." He wasn't ashamed to say that. And I think a Haredi woman, from woman, in the workplace needs to see to it that nobody hugs her and nobody even taps her on the shoulder. If it happened once, she doesn't have to scream. She doesn't have to think that the person that tapped her on the shoulder is after her. No, it might be out of basic courtesy and he means no bad. But she should look for an opportunity to politely convey the message, not in public, and it does not have to be immediately, but she should let people know. This goes back to what I said in the previous question. I think a Haredi woman working together with men should be nice. She doesn't have to be insane. She doesn't have to, this psychological state. Many of our young daughters are taught in school, every man is a vulture. Everyone is after them. And everyone is going to look at them. And if she's going to put on lipstick, then she's macho the whole world. It's crazy. And a strong woman should be nice to people. She could say good morning when she comes into the office. And if a person asks her, "How do you do?" she could say, "I'm fine," But she needs to be very careful and avoid any physical contact.
So a hug, unexpected hug, she receives. She doesn't have to shout, but deal with it if it's going to happen again.
Yes. First of all, she should not reciprocate in the same manner.
Karka olam.
What?
Karka olam.
Yeah, if the person gives her a casual hug, she should not respond in the same fashion. And I think just by being rigid, she already conveys the message that this is not appreciated. You understand what I say?
Absolutely.
She doesn't have to push him away or slap him in the face. But just by not responding, she already made a statement and conveyed a message.
And then if it happens again, then she should
look for an opportunity to clearly say, this is the way we live, and it's nothing personal. She should tell him, please.
Joining us now is Rav Yonasan Sachs. He is a renowned posek, the Rosh Yeshiva of Beis Medrash LeTalmud, also known as Lander College for Men. And in addition, he's the longtime Rav of the Agudas Yisrael Shul in Passaic Park, New Jersey. Those are two full-time jobs, and I am unclear exactly how he was able to write now 36 Seforim, almost 40 Seforim after hours. Rav Sachs, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Super. I'm just going to start out with a question, something that happened today. My wife received a call from a young girl, a Beis Yaakov girl, who decided to join the Israeli army. Good decision or not, we'll leave that aside. Her unit is having a required day at the water park. She's Shomer Torah's mitzvahs, dresses like a Beis Yaakov girl, going to a water park, men and women together. And the question that she asked my wife was, how should she handle this? Maybe she can get an exemption from going. Maybe she should go and sit on the side. What's the proper way to handle the situation? Now, that smacks of a very broad and common question that we deal with in the workplace, social events. holiday parties, company events, team building activities. And I'll just give some examples. I'm sorry this is going to be an elongated question, but I think it's important to set the playing field on this. There was another Beis Yaakov girl who is a programmer, and she told me that they were programming something relating to baseball. She lives in Israel. So they were taking their whole crew out to play baseball, so because Israelis don't really know about baseball. And she had the issue, can she participate in playing baseball, men and women together? Another woman talked about a day out at the beach. Another Beis Yaakov girl, 27 years old, had never seen a movie before, and she was having a team building activity watching Star Wars, her first movie ever. And the question here is, if we don't participate, we can hurt our advancements in the company to the extent that it could hurt our ability to get a raise, a promotion, because we're not viewed as a team player. On the other hand, we need to have limitations on our participation with these type of company events. So I guess the question, the fundamental question of Sachs here is, what would be your general guidance when it comes to attending these type of company events?
The points you raised are profound ones, things that many Balabatim encounter each and every day. Women in the workplace certainly are faced with these ongoing challenges. When it comes to the issues that you raised, social interactions and events, that no doubt it's fraught with tension. You know, the Torah Hashem, as echoed by Chazal, did so much in order to demonstrate certain separation. There's certain domains that we recognize, that we are different, we are distinct. And yet, in today's workforce, the bottom line is not separation, but rather interaction. And each case that you raised, I think, has to be assessed in a different way. The takeaway, I will tell you, is Aseh L'Charav. You have to ask questions very specific to the details at hand. I certainly agree that if there isn't going to be any level of interaction with those you work with, yes, it's going to inhibit your mobility. And part of the Hishtadlus dictates that on a certain level that there has to be interaction. That is clear, but the action has to be that which is consistent with the Torah Hashem. And that's something which is tricky. When it comes to social events, one has to know what the venue is. You know, there's certain social events where what will occur are simply against the halacha, and that is absolutely not. When the Gemara describes in Avodah Zarah and Daf Lamed Aleph, drinking, for example, what the Shulchan Aruch writes in Kuf Yud Beis, that is something I would tell you that absolutely not. The culture of drinking at a social activity is not something that we can buy into in any way. Sometimes it might indeed be necessary that one has to make an appearance, one has to show up, one has to go to a particular social gathering, but, do so in a more minimal way. It's necessary sometimes to be seen, but how you interact and how it is that one, lowers the bar in terms of normal caveats that one would put into place is something that is particularly dangerous. Sometimes you find that in a professional setting, there's certain guidelines that are respected. But if they're broken down at a social event, the next day when you're in the office, so sometimes people will just pick up from that starting point. And that I think one has to be very, very careful about. The first question, of course, is to make sure that whatever the social event is, that there is nothing that is occurring there that is inappropriate, that you're kind of signing on to. If indeed it simply means an opportunity to be seen and to interact, at times, yes, that could be done. But realize that our mission statement is not to fully interact and fully acculturate. If one somehow senses that being a religious Jew means you're going to be somewhat uncomfortable at these social events, I will tell you that's appropriate, that's true by design, that so many of the halacha guidelines are to see to it that there is a certain sense of separation, a sense of discomfort, which allows us to preserve our dignity and to be able to maintain our kedusha.
It could very well be then that discomfort is actually a positive thing. As soon as you're not feeling a discomfort at a company event, maybe that's a bigger problem.
Right, I think so. I think one has to recognize that the brilliance of Chazal, the infinity of our Torah Hashem, recognizes that it is a natural time where lines can be crossed, where guards are down, and therefore to be somewhat uncomfortable at these settings is a healthy, desired outcome. What comes to mind is what the Sefer Chinuch writes in Kuf Pei Ches, that, when it came to so many of the Hagdoros, the added restrictions, Harchakos, the Sefer Chinuch writes that Harbe Yomru came v'nichshelu. Many thought, that I can get by without. Ultimately, though, as the Sefer Chinuch writes, that they were absolutely wrong. And Chazal, in their brilliance and wisdom, knew that you have to set up these boundaries in order simply to be able to maintain the dignity of a Ben and a Bas Torah.
Right. Rav Sachs, you mentioned Aseh L'Charav and the importance of Aseh L'Charav. If you can give us a little bit guidance on how to go about choosing the proper Rav, because what I've found is that there's some poskim Rabbanim who really understand the realities of the secular workplace or the Hamish workplace, and others don't really understand the challenges there. And I'll just give you an example. I heard one Rav talking about the prohibition of shaking or not shaking hands in the with somebody of the opposite gender. Okay, we can say yes, we can say no, but his approach was not only usher, but you should be proud as a Jew to refuse to shake a hand with somebody else. And my thought, my reaction to that was this person is not in touch with human nature of we don't want to feel that we are a pariah in the workplace. We don't want to feel like we're doing something totally socially unacceptable. So if we have a psak, you can't shake hands, it's us to shake hands, that we can accept, but to say we should have a feeling of being proud and having pride at doing such a thing, that was a little bit difficult for me to swallow, and to me that was an indication that Rav wasn't exactly in touch with the challenges that at least I was feeling in the secular workplace. So how would we go about choosing an appropriate posek Rav when it comes to these very difficult, sensitive issues?
Right. That injunction of Aseh L'Charav, I think, is one of the most important life lessons. Very often when we're in yeshiva, when girls are in a seminary, a Beis Yaakov, that there's a certain sense that there are those who I could ask, and they understand that why that's considered to be of such paramount importance. And yet somehow when life goes on, those connections are not as obvious. It's critical to have a Rav in order to help you navigate these challenges, especially of the workplace, but challenges of life in general. Obviously, it has to be someone who you thoroughly respect. Respect means that not just simply that they are renowned in terms of their knowledge. Of course, that must be the case. You have to seek out a posek who really is going to have a breadth of the totality of the Torah, who can tell you the appropriate psak. But it also has to be someone you thoroughly respect, that in your mind they get it. They really understand the question that you're posing. They have to be informed, not only in terms of the strict halacha, but simply informed in terms of the dilemma that you're facing, the expectations of the workplace, and how to be able to navigate properly. If you have a posek who is not fully informed, whether it's not fully informed medically or not fully informed in terms of the social dilemmas that you face, either it will mean that the psak that they're going to give you is not always on target, or simply it will mean that it's not something that you're going to accept. Because I'm not going to dismiss what the posek says because I disagree with him, but rather simply I'm going to respond that he doesn't understand the question that I'm posing. He doesn't get the circumstance. That, I think, is something which is absolutely critical. If you're asking a medical question, the posek really has to have that expertise. If not something which is absolutely firsthand, but surrounded by people who are going to be able to fill him in on that which he does not know. And certainly it's true when it comes to these questions as well. It's easy for one who asks to dismiss the answer if they really feel deep down that the one who I asked does not understand the question, and therefore their question and the response is okay for this environment, but really it is not speaking to the environment that I'm in. So I fully agree that there has to be that time and that care that the posek will not just simply answer yes or no, but will work through the dilemma with the one who asks the question and clearly convey that they really get it. They understand what the expectations, what the pressures of the business environment are, and how to be able to counter that tendency and how to be able to navigate in a very, very difficult environment that we face ourselves with.
Absolutely. I want to follow that up with a related question, mitzad chinuch, as we are trying to educate the young ladies, also the young men. Halavai, we should educate them as well. Is it a good approach? Because I've seen in some of the shuvas of some poskim a tendency for chumras, and I'll give you some examples. I have a tshuva sitting in front of me, I don't want to mention who it's from, that says you shouldn't have any conversations with men. And he says, don't say ma shlomcha, to how you feeling, maybe you can klachs out a good morning. And he says, mefurish, when you're interacting, it has to be bekoved rosh uritzinus. You have to be very serious and, I don't know, kovid rosh, how we would explain, not literally your head down, but not friendly, not interacting. And then he goes as extreme as saying, Lelo chiyuch al paneim, without a smile on your face. And he cites the Shulchan Aruch, Even Ezra Chaf Aleph Aleph, the source Sha'asur lahakel rosh lischok im ha'isha, that you shouldn't have levity with a woman, and his definition of levity is not having a smile on your face. So we're educating in certain segments of society, you can't have any conversations with men, period, unless it's the bare minimum necessary for work. You can't have a smile. You can't use first names, which is acceptable in a good getter in a Hamish workplace, but in the secular workplaces, you look like a pariah. Is this an effective way to be being mechanech our youth? Because I feel that when they do get out there and they're taught these chumras, and then they see that they don't work in a secular workplace or even in a Hamish workplace in certain respects, they tend to disregard halacha in general, not only what is really a chumrah, because they don't know how to distinguish between them.
Right. I think the point is very well taken, that we have to not reinvent in any shape or form and not reinterpret the halacha, but yet the halacha is a dynamic that has to be applied in various circumstances. Nothing can be done keneged hadin, but clearly that environments and expectations can differ, and a psak indeed can be varied. It's clear, for example, the interaction of women in the workplace with men has to be something which is more formal. It has to be something which is more perfunctory. It has to be something which is pro forma, in the sense that the responses and interaction is not something that is registering on a personal or anything remotely intimate in terms of the relationship between the coworkers. But, in today's society, there's simply certain phrases that do not have the same meaning for us as they do in other environments. To say hello is a formal greeting. To say how are you is a formal greeting in many circumstances. And if one is in an environment where that is not an expectation, so certainly that I would say is an appropriate hagdara. If a person in certain environments is going to refer to a coworker by first name, it might strike as being very, very odd. In other contemporary environments, if you don't, it's going to really inhibit your growth in terms of moving, in terms of the company that you are in, and it will be seen as something which is outside of the pale. Here I think, again, I say the harav that you have to know what really is appropriate, what is considered to be something that is crossing the line of that which is more intimate, more personal, and something which is absolutely a perfunctory greeting, which I think is appropriate. So there I think that it depends on the venue, and there I think that certainly is room to be able to have an appropriate, very superficial interaction in terms of what we would consider to be an appropriate greeting. Many Gdolei Yisrael you'll see when they are crossing a path with a secretary, with anyone else, they will not hesitate simply to be able to show a measure of interest, show appreciation on the most superficial level, that they're not walking through the room and not noticing that there's someone else indeed who is there. But no doubt, I appreciate the concern that you echoed in terms of the psukim that you were referencing. One has to be very, very careful. There is a Tosus and Tainus and Daf Yud Aleph, where Tosus discusses the view of Rabbi Elazar HaKapar that a person who becomes a Nazir brings a Karban Chatos at the conclusion of his Nazirus because there was something inappropriate. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us this world to enjoy its bounty, its beauty, its splendor, and yet, Sir Atzmin Hayayin, you're depriving yourself of the view of Rabbi Elazar HaKapar. But Tosus is bothered that, sometimes it's appropriate to do that. Haroes Sota Bekukulo Yazer Atzmin Hayayin. So Tosus balances. Sometimes something may objectively be a chait, but it's appropriate under certain circumstance. In other words, that when you recognize that you're in a certain society where the morals, the values, the norms, and the ethics are outside of the Torah Hashem, you have to react in an extreme, and you have to try to balance appropriately. You have to always realize that what impact the environment indeed is going to have. Not surprising that in certain environments that, yes, one has to realize that you're going to have to say no. You're going to have to set up absolute boundaries. And part of the role of a Rav is going to help you do that what is the appropriate boundary, that you're not crossing a line, but at the same time that you are able to interact in that which the Torah would allow, and also which would be reasonable in terms of the office setting and office environment. So does it mean we can never say how are you? I would not render such a psak to say that one could never smile. One has to be, their body language has to be one which is incredibly serious and formal, but where to draw the line really requires a measure of knowledge of the environment, the particular person who's involved, and a real sense of a Rav who appreciates, who can guide in that fashion.
Rav Sachs, you mentioned interactions between men and women. A common question that people have more and more nowadays in the Uber age that we live in, people just jumping in an Uber and going from place to place, business meetings. Would it be appropriate for a man and woman, a from woman with a man, or a from man with a woman to take a ride together to go to a business meeting, for example, in the absence of yichud, no problem of yichud, no problem of nigia, but simply getting in the car together?
Right. I would tell you that's something that must be avoided. You mentioned, of course, sometimes it can involve issues of yichud and the like, but even on a more basic level. When you're in an office setting, there is a certain amount of professionalism that is expected. It wouldn't necessarily be appropriate in the office for a coworker to come over to you and to socialize with you on a very, very personal level. And if that happens, very often there's an easy out because you're not confined. It's very easy to respond by saying, I'm expecting a call, a client is waiting for me, I have to take care of this at this moment. There's an easy way that you can diffuse that type of situation. When you're traveling together to a meeting, it's clearly not a professional environment. It is normal to be able to interact socially, and therefore it's an environment which is reap for social contact and personal conversation. And let's assume you're there, you're in the car, and all of a sudden a line is crossed. There somehow is a question, an inquiry, there's a statement that really makes you uncomfortable. Your reaction is going to be a very, very limited one. You're confined, you're in the car. In the office, it's easy to be able to diffuse that situation, which is very difficult to do if one is riding together in an Uber. And what I'm afraid will happen is as follows: not only that ride, but the next day that you meet in the office, the bar is already lowered. That coworker that has engaged in all that conversation with you will assume that that is the new normal, and that is something that will continue when you get to your destination as well. And you're going to find that even in a professional meeting, this person is going to be pursuing the personal conversation that began in a venue of downtime when, you thought that was something that was atypical and not something that would begin the new normal of an interaction. So that I would tell you to avoid it at all costs. Let the norm be that really the travel to and from is something that really is done, independently.
Rav Sachs, that was an incredibly insightful response. I do appreciate that. Inevitably, when you're in that car together, you're not going to be talking about work. It's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. It's inevitable that you're going to just start schmoozing. So I think that's 100% correct. I just a couple more questions that are very common, actually maybe very similar questions, so I'll combine them. What's very challenging for women and men, hopefully as well, when they're out in the secular workplace, is the Nivul Peh, which is very common. We hopefully, as from Yiddim, we have refined speech. The Gemara tells us, "L'olam lo yotze adam davar meguna mipiv." We always have to be careful to never say something that is an inappropriate word, a curse word, whatever it may be, and it's very rampant in the workplace. These words are used as adjectives and verbs and nouns in every form, and we're sitting there, and there's an issur not only to speak Nivul Peh, obviously we can't do that, but what do we do about hearing Nivul Peh? And I'd ask the same thing about Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is a very common thing in the workplace. People stabbing the back of others, or just if people aren't aware, and even not stabbing backs, but that's just a common way that people speak, and there we are, and we're Maggid about Lashon Hara. Certainly we can't participate, but how do we deal with being in an environment that they're talking Lashon Hara about, could be a Jewish coworker, and there's a prohibition indeed to be listening to Lashon Hara as well?
Right, it's a significant challenge. Certainly that Nivul Peh, it's true, is rampant in certain environments, but that cannot become a license for anyone, obviously, to engage in Nivul Peh. I think something that must be Harag Vayavor, never broken, never speak Nivul Peh. Do not speak Lashon Hara. As tempting as it may seem, and as much as it may find that you're ingratiating yourself in the eyes of others, obviously, that cannot be done. More subtle, of course, is what happens when simply that this becomes the discussion. I think one thing is clear is that do not participate. You know, it might be hard in a more public environment to get up into protest. I understand that difficulty. I think it should be evident from your body language that this is not something that you enjoy. It's not something that you thrive in. It's not something that you're enjoying listening to. And as the Chafetz Chaim writes, that do not believe the Lashon Hara or give the impression that you're buying into anything that you are hearing. But no doubt, it's a difficult balance at times. One thing is clear is that if a person acts with consistent integrity when it comes to areas of midos and halacha and hashkafa, it will, to an extent, hopefully to a major extent, elicit and raise the bar of the respect that those who are indeed around you. That is only going to go as far as your consistency. Even in a single instance, if somehow, the bar is dropped, then all bets are off. But if they will look to you as the one who clearly seems a level of discomfort when something is said in a disparaging way, like that discomfort is something which is very, very healthy. So it may be difficult. You're sitting there in a meeting and the CEO gets up and really is expressing things in a somewhat inappropriate way. Hard to get up actively into protest. But at least those caveats, to clearly not be glued, do not give the impression that one is enjoying that which they are hearing. The body language should be one of a disconnect and don't participate, don't believe that which you are hearing. And kind of the hope is that that message will seep in and people will start to act a little bit differently around you. That can be an incredible opportunity for Kiddush Hashem. When the Rambam describes Kiddush Hashem and Chil Hashem in Parakei Avos Yisodei HaTorah, the Rambam does so in the most overt ways of a willingness to give up one's life for the Torah Hashem. But the Rambam progresses in terms of simply living your life with the standard of Kiddush and Torah that can be absolutely impactful, incredibly inspirational. And those are opportunities that really we have in the workplace, to be able to inspire those who are around us. It may not be able to be so overt. Some things may have to be somewhat subtle, but when they see the consistency and integrity of that which we do, that I think would speak volumes. And here I will tell you as well that consistency is critical. If they are looking at you as an orthodox individual, so impeccable honesty, squeaky clean. The Tosos and Brachos and Daf Yud Aleph, that there's one Birchas HaTorah that we recite in the morning that carries us through the entire day, because La'olam eno miyayish daito imenu. There really is never a lapse. There's always at least a latent awareness of the Torah Hashem and who we are, and the notion that that's going to inform every aspect of day-to-day life. So I would view the workplace as a challenge, but also an incredible opportunity, that if one really is prepared and a sense of a Selach Harav, what can be accomplished is enormous, simply in raising the bar of those around you. But as mentioned, when it comes to the cases that you mentioned, Lashon Hara, Nivul Peh, one has to set clear guidelines and boundaries.
Right, Rabbi Sachs, actually what you said reflects the metzius that I've experienced and many people have experienced. When we don't curse and we act in a refined manner, people around us actually stop cursing. Happened to me on a number of occasions, and a number of women mentioned this as well to me, that when people would slip in front of them and let out a curse word, they would actually apologize to us because they realize when we act different, they need to do so as well, and it's an offensive thing to us when they would curse in front of us. So definitely, it definitely rubs off on people. So that definitely reflects the Metzius. Rabbi Sachs, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure. Be well.
Before continuing, I just want to insert a clip of my conversation with Rav Asher Weiss, getting his opinion on the uses of first names between men and women in the secular workplace. Here's Rav Asher Weiss.
I think these rules are silly. They're senseless. First name, last name. And this goes back to what I said before. Coming into the office and calling a person Smith or Jones would be totally ridiculous. Nobody calls me Smith. I have a name. So many Rabbonim say that that's away from womanship. I don't think so. It's far more nuanced than, there's no Shulchan Aruch how you have to call a person. And today, calling a person by his first name is not intimate. It's just the normal way to address people. Yes. People call me Rabbi Weiss. Okay, so it depends who you are and what are the social norms. But in the big world, well, if he's the CEO, maybe others call him Mr. Smith as well. But most people today are called by their first names. And from a woman, if she conducts her affairs properly and conveys the right message, could refer to people by their first name.
Joining us now is Dr. Rivka Schwartz. Dr. Schwartz has spent more than 15 years in the field of chinuch. She's an educator and a historian with a PhD from Princeton University. She's a popular lecturer on topics of vital importance to Orthodox women. Dr. Schwartz, I have heard some of your lectures, and I love them. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on the show.
Super. Well, why don't we just dive right in? Some working women, I have been told, and I'll ask your opinion on this, they have been told me that they feel an emotional conflict between work, kids, family, because working takes up a lot of hours, but kids really are their priority. What's my priority? Am I doing the right thing? Is this a common emotional conflict that women feel?
I think it's really, really common that women feel a lot of guilt in every possible direction. Guilt that they're not doing enough at home, that they're not there enough for their kids, that they're not performing well enough at work. And I say when I speak about this topic that if I could accomplish one thing in my talking about it, it would be to get from women not to feel guilty. We're asking ourselves to do the impossible. We're trying to juggle more balls than any human being can juggle. Every one of us is going to make choices in the moment and for the long term about which balls we put down at a given time. And I like to talk about putting down balls, not dropping balls, because one implies that I just wasn't able to do it, and one implies that I'm making a conscious, informed choice about what I can do and what I can't do right now. And when we choose to put down a ball, we should forgive ourselves. We should know that we're trying to do so much. We can't do everything. This is what we have to do to make it work right now, as you title your book, to make it all work. And we shouldn't beat ourselves up and feel guilty about it. And if there was any one thing I could hope to accomplish in talking about this, it would be that. And I think that one of the things that your book does so well in talking about the choices women make is that it's so clear to not be judgmental and to not beat women up for a range of different choices that they might make as they try to make it all work.
Mm-hmm. So let me tell you the following scenario. When I was researching the book, there was a woman. She's an engineer, a programmer, and she said that one day when she picked up her son from school, her three-year-old son, nursery school, the ganenet said to her, she made a comment like this: "I can tell from the behavior of your son that you are not home very much." And the mother was devastated. She felt attacked by that comment. Her priorities were being criticized. How should she respond, either internally or verbally, to that ganenet when being told something like that?
So I'm going to quote here Imi Morasi, my mother, Mrs. Lotta Press, who's the principal of Bnot Leah Prospect Park High School and who has been in chinuch now for more than 50 years. Two things that she often says. The first is that she says that after decades and decades and decades in chinuch, she cannot tell the difference between kids whose mothers work outside the house and kids whose mothers stay home. Any individual child can be easy, can be difficult, can be on board with the program, can be more challenging, but that there isn't a consistent reflection of a pattern. And the other thing my mother says, I hope this is an okay thing to say, my mother says, mostly people aren't mean, sometimes they're dumb. Sometimes people say insensitive or hurtful things not because they're out to hurt you, but because they're not thinking or they're thoughtless or they're heedless or they just blurt something out. And I really think that if we've worked through our own choices and we've made our own decisions, then when someone else says something thoughtless or heedless or just blurted it out, it's our job to say, wow, that was hard to hear, that was hurtful for me. But I'm not going to question all of my own decisions or my and my husband's decisions and all of our family's calculations because one inconsiderate ganenet said something inconsiderate. I'll probably be hurt by it. I'll probably have to swallow hard, but it shouldn't rock me back on my heels and make me question everything that I'm doing because somebody thoughtlessly said something without thinking it through, without processing. I'm sure if I sat down with that ganenet and I said, really? You have no kids of stay-at-home mothers who ever act out? She would say, oh, actually, I do. That was a kind of spur-of-the-moment thing that came out of my mouth. And I think that probably, again, operating on the assumption that most people aren't mean, most people aren't out to hurt you, most people aren't out to be over the Isur D'Oraisa on us Devarim. They just are thoughtless and blurting something out. I don't think I would say something in the moment when I myself was dealing with my own hurt or anger about that. But I do think it's worth coming back at some point calmly and saying, I just want to tell you what it felt like to me to hear that. Here's a constellation of reasons that I work, or maybe not, because maybe it's not the gunman's business, but there's a whole constellation of family calculations as to why I work. And, and to hear you attribute, I'm sorry my son was misbehaving that day, but to hear you attribute that to my working outside the home was a hurtful, painful, difficult thing to hear. And I'd like you to ask you to consider that and think about that in the way you talk to parents in the future. I do think that's a valuable thing to say, but it's not a lashing out or a kicking back in the moment of the pain. But in terms of how I internalize that, I should reconsider all of my life decisions that I made together with my husband, or if my kids are older, together with my children that make sense for our family, because the momentary blurting by a ganenet, we have to be more confident in our own decisions and choices than that.
So build ourselves and then maintain our calm in the heat of the moment, and then go back afterwards and to set her straight, and also so we don't have to live tortured by that negative statement by somebody.
The people whose judgment about our decisions matters are the people who are closest to us. If your children say to you, Mommy, you're always on your phone at the supper table, that's a time to reconsider whether you're a little bit too tethered to work electronically. I'm not talking here about being on the phone on Facebook. I'm talking about, answering work emails. And is it possible that the office will survive from 6 to 9 p.m. if I put down my device from 6 to 9 p.m. and I'm not available to answer emails until later at night after my kids are asleep? That's a judgment you have to think seriously about and respond to. Random ganenet's judgment is not something you should think about and respond to. And I do think it's problematic when we let any random person's opining about our life choices lead us to question those life choices. I think sometimes we can say, okay, that's a random person opining, great, have an opinion, and not let it touch us in our core. And I realize it's hard in this area because of what I spoke about earlier, which is because so many women live with so much guilt. It's so close to the surface, it's so raw, that anyone else saying something can trigger that and bring that back up. And I really think it's work to say, I've made choices that make sense for me and my family. My husband's fine with it. My kids are fine with it. This is working for us right now. And then not to let outsiders who don't know your life and don't know what you're living make you doubt or question yourself.
Right. So you mentioned having limitations on use of technology, for example, at home, putting the smartphone on the side and not focusing on it and focusing on the children. That's a very difficult thing to do. I mean, we are addicted to technology, be it email or our cell phones or texting. How can we internalize the importance of putting that technology aside when we are trying to spend quality time with the kids?
I think all you have to do is ask your children how they feel about it, and the vehemence of their response will confirm for you how important it is. I talk to my high school students. I teach in high school. I talk to my high school students about technology all the time. And Kaseder, when I talk to my students about technology and their use of technology, they say to me, my parents are worse than I am. That's what kids say to me all the time. You think you're worried about teenagers texting while driving? You should see what my parents are doing while they're driving. You think we're on the phone all the time? You should see what my parents are like. And what that says to us is that maybe we're not modeling for our children what we should be or can be modeling for them. You know, if you're a heart transplant surgeon and you're waiting to get the news that there's a heart ready to transplant, you really, really need to be on your phone every second. Most of the rest of us are not dealing in matters of life and death that way most of the time. And some of us have to be honest about the fact that it really comes from, I want to be the great employee. I want to be the first one who answers that email. I want to be, okay, at what cost? If I'm allowing myself, again, this is like, it's parallel to the idea of putting down the ball in the sense that we have to acknowledge it's a judgment and a choice that I make, not something that happens to me. I know your boss sends you emails at 7:30 at night, but it's a choice to respond to that at 7:31 or to have everybody at work know that from 6 to 9 p.m. my phone is parked someplace and anything you need an answer about you'll get at 9:30. Or you won't. I'll tell you that I personally, by the time I'm done with a long day at work and then whatever I do in the evening with my children, I'm done for. I go to sleep early. I wake up crazy early in the morning, and people know that if they need an email response from me, they will get it at 4:30 in the morning. And, okay, granted, I work in high school, not in organ transplantations, but I don't think there's ever been such a crucial emergency that it couldn't wait and that it couldn't be answered at 4:30 the next morning. And if it is such a crucial emergency, they'll call me on the phone. I think some of us are not even consciously making the choice to prioritize our work over being fully available to our families, and that's something that our children feel very strongly. Again, if you want to know how to overcome the challenge of being meshubah to our technology, ask your kids how they feel about it. And when you hear how your children feel about it, you'll figure out how to overcome that challenge.
I tell people it's kind of like walking a dog. You see some people and they walk the dog, and sometimes the dog walks the people, drags them ahead. And the same thing has to be with our technology. We need to make sure that we're in control and the technology is not in control of us. Okay, well, I want to just change direction a little bit. We've talked about the emotional conflict or the guilt that a woman feels by being in multiple worlds at a time. I want to talk now about the practical balancing of everything. A frum woman is requested to juggle a lot. There's work, kids, husband maybe would be remembered occasionally, Shabbos prep, community, friends, Shabbos guests. So when I was researching the book, I was speaking with a young woman. She had just started working, an accountant in Australia, and she said, do I know anyone who is a little bit more older and advanced in their career she can speak with and get advice? So I put her together with a woman from Los Angeles who was an attorney. She'd been working a number of years, and they had some emails, conversations back and forth. And the comment by the attorney, who had a lot more experience, named Myrna, she says, I don't buy what they tell young ladies nowadays that you can have it all. Something must give. And that statement, something must give, really resonated with me. What's your take on this? Is it possible to juggle everything, balance everything successfully, or is this something that is just not attainable?
So I want to tell you that when I first started to research this topic, not just to speak about it from my own lived experience, but to read what the literature had to say about it, I came across a book by the former president of Barnard College. Her name is Deborah Spar, and the book is called Wonder Women. And Deborah Spar is writing about the attempt to pull this off in the world. And she talks about that in that book. She writes in that book and talking about it, that the reality is that no woman can do it all. No human can do it all. And what was so striking to me is that, of course, she's writing this in a world in which 3 children is a big family, in a world in which I make fun of this all the time. If you ever read the secular women's cooking magazines, they describe preparation for Thanksgiving dinner like Dwight Eisenhower preparing for the D-Day invasion. 1 month before, buy the turkey. 3 weeks before. And, when we have a 3-day Yom Tov, we do that 6 times, as we in America just did. We just had a 3-day Yom Tov of Shavuos. We just did 6 of those meals in 3 days, and I'm going to turn around and, do it again for Shabbos and do it again and do it again. So Deborah Spar is saying no one can have it all in a world in which the demands of women on women are significantly less than they are in our world. And so if having it all means being the perfect mother and the perfect wife and the perfect employee and the perfect Ovedes Hashem and the perfect and the perfect and the perfect, we can't do all of those things together all the time. And once we acknowledge that, and once we forgive ourselves that, and we stop beating ourselves up over that, then we can make real choices about what makes things work. And I want to talk about a couple of things that for me have made things work. Acknowledging, again, that it's not going to be the same for everybody. And again, one of the things that I liked so much about this section in your book was that it was not judgmental about the range of different things that women do to make it work. So here's one thing that I personally do to make it work. I have a lot of household help. All of my children are in school. My youngest child is in 2nd grade, and I have a lot of household help still, even though I don't need babysitting. That's how I make it work. My husband has a very demanding position in the community. He's both a Rosh Yeshiva and a Shul Rav. I have a job that has me taking on all kinds of public roles as a high school administrator. And the way that the house keeps functioning is because I have a lot of help in the house. After I went to Eretz Yisrael for a year of seminary, I spent the 2nd year of seminary in Yavneh Seminary in Cleveland. And Rebbe Chaya Osban, the principal of Yavneh Seminary, used to encourage us all the time to get household help. She used to say to us, it's a mitzvah to raise your children. It's not a mitzvah to clean up after your children. And I think that's really a very valuable distinction. And if having somebody help you wash the laundry and do the dishes is going to be one thing that, now obviously that's not going to be financially viable for everybody. I don't have to say that. Again, that no one model is going to work for everybody. But sometimes there are choices or trade-offs that we make. And I know women, even for whom finances might be tight, but who have made a choice to trade something else off in order to have a few more hours of household help because it helps the whole thing run much more smoothly. I'm going to tell you another trade-off I made that I suppose some people might be very judgmental about, but is a reality in my life. I work in Riverdale in the Bronx. My daughters go to school on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It takes me about an hour each way during the day to get from my work to their school and back. My daughter's school, as many of our kids' schools do, put on lots of performances and lots of presentations and lots over the course of the year. And so I started saying to my daughters, you can pick one each year. I'll come to one, your big Megillas Rus play or your big Sarah Schneera play, so I'll come to that. But then I'm not coming to the book fair, the science fair, to this fair, to that fair, because I can't miss that much work. That's also a choice about what I'm putting down. Are there stay-at-home mothers who come to every single event the school puts on? I'm absolutely certain that there are. But for my life and my reality and my schedule and my daughters, that's what's going to happen for us. I'm going to come to one big thing every year, and I'm not going to come to everything all the time. And sometimes my husband is able to go to another one, and sometimes he's not, and that's how that plays out. So the figuring out what's the thing to hold on to and what's the thing to put down and how are we going to make it work? I mean, I could give you examples all day. I tell this when I speak about this. I say, years and years ago, I gave up on any idea of clever themed shalach manos that match the kids' costumes, whatever it is. First of all, I can never get all my kids to wear a themed costume. That wasn't happening anyway. Every year on Purim morning, I put up a giant pot on my stove. I make a huge pot of sesame noodles, and everybody gets sesame noodles and a grape juice or a wine. And that works for me for shalach manos because I'm not working on shalach manos for 3 weeks in advance. I'm not telling everybody else that they should also give sesame noodles for shalach manos. If they did, they'd steal my thunder. But that's a thing that I've said in order to make it work for me. And someone else might say, I feel like it's my whole creative outlet for the whole year that I spent 3 months planning my shalach manos and writing the poem. Wonderful. We're all going to do different things in different ways. We're all going to make it work in different ways. But once we acknowledge that we can't do everything, figuring out what we will do, what we won't do, what balls we'll try to juggle, what balls we will just put down, how we're going to help ourselves and support ourselves, I just can't say how important this is. Instead of every one of us feeling like we're failing at what we should be doing and being upset at ourselves and feeling guilty all the time.
Now, that feeling of guilt, does that come because of internal pressure to want to manage everything successfully? Does it come from societal, from the community? Does it come from the husbands? Where does that guilt come from?
I think it comes from a combination of things. I think it comes from that we're carrying within us both the messages of broader American society. You know, women should work outside the home and be successful and advance and accomplish. We're carrying in ourselves the frum expectations of being a wife and being a mother, supporting our husbands in learning, having large families and many children, having a certain kind of Shabbos table and Yom Tov table and a certain kind of home. And I also want to say that there are certain cultural pressures that absolutely contribute to this. I once spoke on this topic, and I spoke about the various factors that play into how women feel bad about themselves. And a psychologist in the community I was speaking in came over to me afterwards and said, there's one thing that I don't think you're factoring in, and that's envy. The extent to which we're also looking at what someone else has and wanting to have that or feeling like we should have that and why can't I, instead of saying we should rehearse, we should stand in front of a mirror and say, that's what you do and that's great for you, I'm so happy for you. That's not what I do. Instead of saying, oh, she does that, I should do that too. And I will say here, I know this is like such a popular punching bag, but I will join in the popular punching. While Frum Women's magazines give many Frum women a lot of pleasure, I think they also drive very unreasonable expectations about what our food should look like, about what our table should look like. We went from the 3 different colors of chocolate mousse topped with ganache and chocolate curls to now let's make all of that and then talk about plating it and how you should arrange it on the plate with, you know, I don't know what, edible orchid petals and dots of raspberry puree or something. As if many of us had time in our lives for the 3 layers of chocolate mousse, never mind the edible orchid petals, the dots of raspberry puree, and the plating. And it looks super beautiful in the magazine. And for some of us, I think it's driving a further sense of that's what a Yom Tov dessert should look like, so my chocolate chip cookies or my brownies aren't measuring up. And again, I'm repeating myself like a broken record. If I could do anything for Frum women, it would be to convince us not to feel guilty and not to beat ourselves up.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're saying that by reading the magazines, we increase the guilt. A number of the guys in the yeshiva, they were talking about social media, that when they see the social media, and a lot of the social media, people putting pictures of themselves is to portray how perfect their lives are, which they never are. And then everyone who follows them and watches them becomes jealous, and they feel they're lacking because they don't have what is purportedly such a perfect life. So that seems to be the same dynamic going on there.
I actually know of some studies. I've looked at some studies specifically regarding teenage girls and the extent to which deep involvement on social media contributes to teenage girls' dissatisfaction with themselves. I'm not on Frum Woman Instagram, but I'm sure that Frum Woman Instagram has the same kind of effect for Frum women. I actually also think that sometimes that's one thing, when somebody portrays their perfect life on social media and you feel bad. I think something else we sometimes do is that we look at some other woman who seems to be doing it all, and we beat ourselves up that we're not as good as her. It's the amazing woman phenomenon. You're amazing. I don't know how you do it all. And people say this to me because I have a family and I have a job and I'm sort of a rebbitzin in my spare time and I say to them all the time, I'm not amazing and I'm not doing it all. I tell people if I carried my living room on my back like a snail, you would see that I'm not doing it all. But you can't see what my living room looks like. I walk out of my house and I shut the door and you think I'm doing it all. And that amazing woman talk doesn't help anybody because the woman you're talking to actually feels like a fraud because she knows all the ways she's not doing it all. And you feel bad because you're not doing it all. And so I encourage women, instead of these Mephis stories, this amazing woman who had this many kids and that high-powered profession and she only slept 3 hours a night and she baked challah every day, instead of telling those stories that just make us all feel bad, a much better thing to do is to find a woman who you think is doing a lot, even if she's not doing it all, and to say to her, what's one practical tip, one idea, one suggestion you have for me as to how you make it work, how I can make it work? And then she'll tell you things like I told you my story about Shalos Manas, and again, I have many more, and they're not anyone's particularly brilliant life hacks. They're just the ways I've figured out to make it work, and many other women have figured out many other ways to make it work. And if you approach a woman who you think is amazing and doing it all, and instead of saying, you're amazing, how do you do it all, in which case, again, she feels bad because she's not amazing, and you feel bad because you're not amazing. If you say to her, I really admire the fact that you seem to do so much. Can you you tell me one thing you do to make it work, you'll actually pick up a lot of practical wisdom. You'll feel better because you got practical wisdom. She'll feel better because you can share some practical wisdom, and nobody's being hurt by this double whammy of the amazing woman that doesn't exist. But if looking at social media is making you feel bad, it's not Altfrumkeit. I'm not speaking about getting off social media, Altfrumkeit. That's a different conversation. If it's making you feel bad about yourself, get off of social media, Alts your mental health.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. It seems one of the issues, it really depends on the individual and the school they're going to, but there are seminaries that do teach the girls, you need to work, you need to raise the kids, you need to prepare for Shabbos, and don't bother your husband's learning. Is that a productive thing to teach the girls? And if not, what should the girls be taught?
So I have to say that I've gone in a trajectory in my own life about this. I've watched women I'm close to go in trajectories in their own lives about this. And you might say it's getting more cynical as you get older, or you might say it's growing up, or most generously you might say the realities when you're newly married and have no children are very different than the realities when you're parenting teenagers and young kids at the same time. It actually might be that in the first 6 months of your marriage, it's realistic that you will take care of every household responsibility so your husband can sit and learn. In the beginning of my marriage, I did the taxes, and I took the car to the mechanic, and I cooked, and my husband. But then we had a baby, and then we had another baby, and then that system stops working. And I think what sometimes happens is that a frame that, again, in its most generous way of thinking about it, could make sense in Shana Rishona, when a couple with no children rapidly stops making sense, and either if the young husband still expects that as his due, or the young wife still asks that of herself as her responsibility, things are rapidly going to come to a breaking point. It's just not doable, especially, and I think this is important to say, with the physical burdens of pregnancy and then of parenting an infant. And so if she's pregnant and then she's not sleeping at night and she's nursing and she's doing all the things she's doing and she's also expecting of herself to never ask her husband for anything and he's expecting never to be asked for anything, that's not going to be a very healthy place to be. I don't know what seminaries are or are not saying. I can't speak to that. But I can say that that program might be a realistic and livable program for a very limited slice of time, very early in the marriage. And then I think we need to readjust and recalibrate to the realities that we're living. And again, everyone's reality is going to be different. Some woman who's expecting might be healthy as a horse and able to keep doing everything, and someone might be sick and in bed for 6 months, and very rapidly her husband's going to be asked to recalibrate very differently. And the whole don't disturb him is just not doable when she has a toddler at home and she's now in bed for 6 months with a complicated pregnancy. And everybody has to adjust to the realities in front of them. I will say one thing. I used to hear a term, I still hear a term, called self-care. When I first heard the term self-care, I was very skeptical of it. I thought it meant something like that a woman in the middle of all the busyness of her life should go out and get a manicure or something so she felt better. I don't know. It seemed very silly to me. And I came to realize that actually I was wrong, and self-care is a very meaningful concept. Because self-care is you cannot give to others unless you are physically taking care of yourself. And so a woman who is running herself ragged, who's not sleeping, who's not taking care of her own emotional needs, because all she's doing is trying to keep every single ball in the air and never say to her husband, I need help right now. I need you to step up. Things have changed since we got married. We now have 3 little kids, or we now have a child with special needs, or someone's sick, or all the things that happen in family life. And now we have to recalibrate the balance. If she doesn't do that and she falls apart, then nobody is better off. So we're all much better off saying that those programs can be valid programs for very early on in the marriage. And, and for Yechidos, the skula. I know, we all read the biography of Rebbetzin Kanievsky, and the women think they're supposed to be Rebbetzin Kanievsky, and the men think they're supposed to be married to Rebbetzin Kanievsky. That's for Rebbetzin Kanievsky.
Right. So that if they become Rav Chaim Kanievsky, then they have a right to think
that. Too. Right.
Now, from a husband's perspective, should he just be reactive, and if the wife asks for help, he should then obviously b'simcha offer to help, or should he be proactively looking to help in the house as well?
So I actually don't even love the framing of helping. Like it's her house that he's helping. I would say in this might not correspond with what's being taught in the seminaries or even what's mainstream thought in the broader frum world. I think that if we think about the home as a partnership and all parts of it as a partnership, that doesn't mean we're all doing half of everything. I'm doing half of the cooking and you're doing half of the cooking. But it means we're thinking together about how this whole partnership is working. And again, at the very beginning of marriage, this partnership might be working with a balance of 98% and 2%. And that partnership might work that way in the beginning of marriage. And then at some point in the marriage, the partnership might not be working that way. But you're absolutely right. While it's certainly a positive step if when the wife says, I need help, I'm collapsing, the husband says, great, what can I do? A healthier partnership is that the husband is keyed in and aware and realizes that the division of responsibilities that worked when there were no children or there was one child in whatever changed family circumstance it is. Again, whether it's just a bigger family and more kids, or it's a specific acute issue, or it's the wife's big project is coming due at work the week before Pesach, or, and he says, okay, what are we doing now to make this work for us? Number one pet peeve, I think, is when men are watching their own children and they call it babysitting. It's not babysitting. Those are your kids. You're their father. That's part of parenting. And so I would prefer not the framing of the husband helping around the house. I would prefer the framing of this is a partnership to make this family work. That doesn't mean 50-50 division of labor. That's not what partnership means. But it means we share responsibility for making this thing work. And we're thinking together about what it takes. Oh, you've gotten a new job now. Wife has gotten a new job now to make more money to support the family with a longer commute. So how is husband stepping up to make that longer commute work for the family? And I think that orientation towards partnership is vitally important. So it's not about should he be doing housework or should he not be doing housework. It's are we thinking together about how this family works?
Wow, very powerful. Dr. Schwartz, I want to thank you for joining us. This has been an eye-opening conversation. Thank you so much.
Really, really my pleasure. Thank you so much. And again, I really enjoyed reading the part of your book about getting it all done. There were parts of it that really, really resonated with me with some of the things that I've been thinking and speaking about for a long time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Thank you. Us now is Mrs. Elisheva Liss, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist in private practice in Long Island, New York. Her caseload is primarily, almost exclusively, Orthodox Jews, the entire range of Orthodoxy. However, it's important to note that a significant percentage of her caseload is Hasidish. Mrs. Liss is also a lecturer, a published author, and we are delighted to have you joining us here today.
My pleasure.
A recurring theme when I was researching the recent book that my wife and I published called Making It All Work was that women reported that when they work in a mixed environment, meaning men and women together, there were a lot of challenges. It could be a broad scale from discomfort being in a secular workplace or harassment or even infidelity. What has been your experience with people coming to you and discussing their shalom bayis issues as it relates to a wife being in a workplace, be it a secular workplace, and I'd also like to talk about a Hamish workplace.
Yeah, this is a real sign of the times. It's very much an issue. And as the world in general has become more casual about boundaries between the genders, and we're seeing, on the secular news as well, a lot of confusion around these issues of what's an appropriate way to interact with someone of the opposite gender. I would love to be able to say that the halachas that we have are empirically a good impediment or protect or a deterrent. But we see it in the work environments too. But I'll backtrack a little because you mentioned a few things. I'll try to be organized about the answer. In terms of infidelity, I think it's important to define what we mean when we talk about infidelity. So marital betrayal comes in different outfits and gradations. There's the classic extramarital relationship where you could have romantic feelings and physical intimacy. Then there's also the one-time or occasional impulsive indiscretion, either with a stranger or with an acquaintance. It wasn't like a real established relationship. It was more like a burst of, action. Sometimes this happens under the influence of alcohol or other substances, yes, also in the frum community. You have sometimes there's serial or chronic cheating with hypersexual, compulsive, promiscuous behavior, and that actually tends to be a very serious problem. And then there's but we didn't go all the way affair, meaning there was some level of physical engagement, but not what, let's say, we would halachically define as to consummate this relationship. Then we have these two more subjective types of infidelity, and these are very common, the pornographic and the emotional affairs. Pornographic could mean simply using and watching material of an explicit nature. This isn't always perceived as infidelity by the other partner. A lot of this has to do with cultural and ideological beliefs around the use of porn. But pornographic infidelity could also involve more interactive virtual behavior online or on the phone with real individuals, and that's much less likely to get a pass. Emotional affairs are when the infidelity was not necessarily of a physical nature, but the level of connection and affection that's really, originally intended for the marital relationship has been diffused or displaced or shared onto another party outside of the marriage. So all of these examples share in common the feature of veering outside the confines of the sanctity of the marital relationship for intimate or sensual pleasure, a sense of betrayal on the part of the other party, and almost always include the feature of secrecy and some deception. That's
And now you're talking now about men or women or both?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
So
yes.
when it comes to women, that's our focus right now,
Sure.
Infidelity in the workplace, how common a problem is this? Is this just a very rare occurrence, or is this something that you see on a regular basis?
I mean, the statistics are hard to know. I mean, they're all over the place in terms of the studies. So I don't think that people tend to be particularly honest when reporting these incidents anyway. But the statistics are high. I know. I think it's supposed to be like miutam ba'arayos, but I think nowadays it might be more than that. In my own empirical, my own limited practice, I see that the infidelity is not limited to workplace scenarios. I think the workplace makes up probably about half of, or maybe less than half of the infidelity instances, and the number of men who act out that way and the number of women, I didn't see a huge difference, unless you count pornography. The women who catch their husbands using pornography, even though there was either an explicit or implicit understanding that was not part of their lifestyle, that takes the men's number a lot higher. But if we're talking about more traditional definitions of unfaithful behavior, it could be because I'm a female therapist, but I definitely see a lot on women's end as well, and I definitely wouldn't call it a one-off thing, especially. Sorry.
And a small percentage as a result of working with men, or is it outside the workplace that it results from?
I think, again, in my practice, it's not specifically the workplace. There are plenty of other places where there are other settings where people meet up. It sometimes starts on social media or with WhatsApps. The other social venues, shul, people meet in shul, schools through their kids' schools, simchas, community projects, neighbors, hobby venues, the gym, members of extended family. That happens more often than you would think, or family through marriage. People that you're not really related to, but you're related to through marriage. So people find all different ways to meet.
Now, is it the infidelity? Is it because of the pull, the allure, or is it like a push thing, like you're being pushed from the house? In other words, you have a shalom bayis problem at home, so you tend towards that direction. So,
I think every affair sort of has its own backstory. But I would guess that it's, I think I make an educated guess that I would say it's more the pull than the push. So very often the person who was, I guess, cheated on, the cheatee, will try to blame him or herself and sort of say, oh, it's because I neglected, or I wasn't good enough, or I wasn't good looking enough, or I wasn't attentive enough. And sometimes there's some truth to that. But, I always kind of say, especially if I see that person really like turning themselves into a shmata over it, I'll say, listen, unless your spouse turned to you and said, we have a problem, we need help, we need to take care of this, and you said, no, I refuse, I want you to stay in a miserable marriage. The solution to an imperfect marriage is not an affair. It's, hey, let's go work on our marriage. I think, I would say generally the recipe for an extramarital incident is a combination of, three main factors. The temptation, there has to be someone that that you're interested in. The opportunity to act on that temptation, right? Because there could be someone, but if there's no chance to do it, then it's not going to happen. Followed by a series of choices to do so. So there's the temptation, the possibility, and the choice. Sometimes that choice is impulsive. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's premeditated and strategic. So some couples will say, well, they'll do like a hindsight version, a retrospect. Well, there must have been something lacking in the marriage that made somebody seek something outside the marriage. Maybe, no marriage is perfect. Every marriage has room for improvement, but I don't necessarily see a correlation between, let's say, the marital dissatisfaction before the affair and the likelihood of there having been an affair. I think it's more, temptation is all around.
So this can happen. This can happen even if all is well at home.
It's a scary thing to say that, but affairs do occur often in ostensibly happy couples. Sometimes it's not about the couple. Sometimes the individual went through something personal. They fell into a sort of temptation that they just had a very hard time resisting. Sometimes they have a trigger from a trauma. I had this a couple of years ago where this woman who, I'm not usually so surprised when people disclose to me that they're cheating, but this woman, I was really surprised. And she told me, and it was a particularly unique situation there, and I'm always very, very careful. I don't want to give any kind of identifying anything when I talk about clientele. And so I paused for a second, and then I said, something happened when you were a child, right? And it was sort of a guess, but it just made so much sense. And then we uncovered a trauma, and the age, timing, and stuff that was going on in her family sort of pointed to these, to this idea. So I don't want to be alarmist and say, yes, this can happen to anyone, but there's not like a specific profile.
So this could happen to a frum woman who's shomer al halacha, covers her hair, has 6 kids. Okay,
on the other hand, though, I do have a lot of clients who, and this is a communal, sort of like a cultural thing too, some clients who feel that they were pressured to marry someone they didn't know very well, or someone to whom they weren't attracted and they knew it, but they were, told that, anyway, it's not important, or, if it was a basho, sometimes I don't have time to, think it through. And that lack of marital chemistry and connection can lead to, profound loneliness and deprivation. The lack is real, and it create a sense of longing, especially if an alternative option presents itself. There's also, I don't know how far you want to go with this, but I've seen a nice number of affairs with a person of the same gender. So in that case, following Hilchos Yichud and Negia and other stuff, it wouldn't necessarily have helped.
Right. So let me ask you a question. When I was speaking with women for the book that I put out, I spoke with a couple of Hasidic women, and they wanted to discuss with me and inform me of the challenges that are in the Hamish workplaces, the frum workplaces, as opposed to the secular workplaces. And that was a real surprise to me, that there would be problems in dealing with gender issues and infidelity in a Hamish workplace, which is apparently, they all know the halachas. They know the halachas of Yichud and Negia. And then I spoke with 2 Gedolim as well, and they said themselves that they thought it could be even worse in a frum workplace than in a secular workplace, because in a secular workplace you have a built-in boundary between you and others. Others know that you're different, but in a Hamish workplace there aren't those built-in boundaries between you. What's your experience in this area?
I unfortunately, it's most of the people involved in these kind of things, they don't have a specific personality, a profile, stereotype. They don't have a vibe or a predictability. They'll often say they never intended for this to happen. They didn't go looking for it. It's not like them, and I believe them. It can happen to people who are otherwise very sincere. I think that, one example that comes to mind, a couple of years ago, I was working with a young Hasidic woman, lovely girl, who was very not happy with her husband. Different certain ways, and I asked her. I said, "Look, you don't have a lot to compare to. Do you think maybe you're just not enjoying marriage in general? Like, how do you know it's your husband?" I just wanted to get an idea of how she was sort of contextualizing this. And she said, "Well, I do have someone to compare to." And she started to tell me about her relationship with her boss. That was it was not a G-rated relationship. So one category of people who specifically need to be particularly guarded against unboundaried behavior, because this temptation is so great, is people in hierarchical professional relationships where you have a superior and a subordinate dynamic. One example that's hard to talk about but important to talk about is people who are in chinuch, especially men who teach girls and women and men who teach young boys. Because there's a lot of underreported instances of situations that are not just extramarital but disturbing in other ways. So anyone in a position of authority and respect should be extra careful. That seems to come with the temptation to abuse the power. And it's not just the marital disloyalty. There's an exploitation piece that's very, very troubling. But it seems to be that the temptation is very, very great, and it can be very traumatic, and the repercussions are devastating.
Well, now, what should somebody do? They're in the workplace, and they start to have feelings for a coworker. How do we get that in control? What gedorim can be put in?
So there's feelings and there's feelings. Feelings for a coworker or anyone outside of the marriage could happen to anyone. The first thing to do is acknowledge, and I think sometimes with especially a very Hamish population, people get really spooked. So sometimes I'll get a call from someone like, I'm so scared because I found somebody attractive that's not my spouse, and we need to first sort of normalize that and say, okay, so you're human. It's normal and human to notice other people. It's not obscene to notice that you're someone you're not married to, and that in itself cannot be the realistic standard for scandal. And there has to be an understanding that just because you felt something doesn't mean you have to get on the train and take it all the way to the end of the line. There are gradations of feeling, gradations of temptation, and levels of engagement. It's a challenge, but life is full of challenges and full of temptations, and it's hard. But people do hard things. Personal boundaries can be very helpful. So I know, some of the examples I'll give are not specifically things that I would promote personally or professionally endorse, but I'm giving examples because I know you reach a wide range of people. There are some people who try to avoid using first names with the opposite gender when you can do that in a socially appropriate way. It might be awkward to do that on a regular basis, but there are definite studies that will say that using a person's first name repeatedly will create more connection. So if there's someone that you're struggling with in terms of attraction, maybe don't do it with them. You can just avoid it. You can try to figure out what those feelings are, where they're coming from, and if that person can work out a way to translate what they're craving into their own marriage. So I had a guy in here recently who was telling me that he was having such a pleasant talk over lunch with his female coworker and started to feel guilty. He's like, I can't remember the last time I just talked in this lighthearted way with my wife. And so we discussed, how he could carve more time for, recreational conversation with his wife rather than just, sometimes it will help shine a light on what work needs to be done within the marriage and then turn the focus that way. That's a really important thing to do. That's self-awareness and the integrity. They could try to, we probably should all do this, try to avoid any kinds of overly playful or flirtatious repartee. If there's, particular temptation, don't spend unnecessary time socializing with them. It's good to examine, on the other side, our marital integrity. And if somebody is feeling a little bored in their marriage, just kind of double down, invest more in the marriage. Relationships can suffer wear and tear over time. They require maintenance and repair and renewal.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is sometimes you're going to have to work on the gedorim in the workplace, and sometimes you're going to have to work on your marriage, and actually both are well advisable.
I would say we should all be doing both. I think it's, to be a well-rounded person, we need to be able to look in the mirror and be proud of the way we conduct ourselves, privately and publicly. So the publicly is when we're out, and the privately is when we're in. And, who we are on the outside, kind of impacts how we are on the inside and vice versa, meaning inside the home and outside the home. A real human spouse that comes with those daily, the quotidian responsibility and history and the familiar visible flaws can't fairly compete with the fantasy and forbidden fruit factor of someone who is new and unencumbered. One guy told me that he felt like a woman in his office was being a little too friendly for his comfort level, so he went and put a picture of his family on his desk, and as his screensaver, a picture of him and his wife, as sort of an innocent for himself and for anybody else who walks by. So people do these little things, to try to, remind themselves about who they want to be and how they want to be.
Mayim genuvim yumtaku.
Yeah.
Stolen waters are always sweeter. Are there times that's the only solution is that somebody has to just leave the job?
That's a strong statement to make, and I'm not a Navi, so I don't know for sure. I would. It can be tempting to sort of legislate, to sort of just say, well, when it gets beyond a certain point, you have to leave the job. What would the repercussions of a decision like that be? I think only the person in that situation, with his or her spouse, if that spouse is in the know, can evaluate all the variables and make that call. It's a tough call to make. I definitely have seen people ask their spouse to leave a job on the basis of coworker culture.
One more point that I think is important to add, because we're talking about these very heavy topics, and it can sound a little scary, especially when we know that the numbers are not, higher than we would want them to be. I want to say that I think it is possible for marriages to heal. I know I've seen that it's possible for marriages to heal from different types of infidelity incidents and disclosures when both spouses are committed and wanting to work on it. It takes real work. It takes hard work. It often takes therapy. But this is something that can be done. It is done all the time. And for any listeners who are struggling with this kind of episode, there's definitely hope.
Interesting. I have one final question for you. If our listeners here want to hear more of your wisdom, do you have anything available online or elsewhere?
Sure, thank you. Yes, I have my original professional website is elishevelis.com. The last couple of years I've been blogging more on nefesh.org. It's the International Association of Orthodox Therapists, and my blog there is called Heg Only Be. I have a book called Find Your Horizon of Healthy Thinking, which is on Amazon, working on another book and some digital course content that should be coming out soon, Mirza Hashem.
Amazing. Mrs. Liss, we really appreciate your joining us today. This has been incredibly informative. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Joining us now is Mrs. Miriam Brilleman, who is a senior executive working in human resources called HR in some absolutely massive companies. She's worked at AT&T, Citigroup, BASF, and currently Cushman & Wakefield, a company with over 50,000 employees. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Super. Well, I have to tell you a quick story before we get going. There was a time that I worked at a mid-sized company, probably about 15, 18 years ago, and I was an executive vice president, a general counsel, but it wasn't a big enough company to have a human resources department, so I had to handle human resources as well. And the most memorable thing that happened back then in that company was finding drugs in the bathroom, and we had to decide, how do we handle this? And we had a call center, about 100 employees in the call center, and then corporate was about 50. And we decided that it was not advisable to do drug testing because we thought we would have no longer any employees. So we took the approach of Shev Val Tasa, do nothing, say nothing, and that was our approach to that issue. But that is typically not the approach that we can take in HR. So I wanted to ask you in particular, what are the issues you deal with, and what are the common complaints that you hear?
Great question. So let me just tell you that today, HR is a very large and complex function, and most of my career has been spent providing strategic partnership to businesses through people initiatives that could include building effective organizational structures and capability, leading projects relative to integration, and also implementing HR best practices that engage people to do their best. But there is often a governance aspect in HR, which is included in my role today. So making sure we have the right policies in place, that we're abiding by our company standards, local, regional, country, global laws. It's all part of my responsibility and my department's responsibility. And to answer your question directly, people come to HR for all sorts of things. It could be a safety issue, could be a fairness issue. I do hear a fair amount about harassment and people getting too comfortable with each other.
At what point does the woman who feels uncomfortable, because it could be touching or it can be simply speaking, somebody made a comment to her, when does she come to HR and when does she just say, this is still acceptable, it's not offensive, I don't feel it's risen to the level of my needing to get a senior executive in HR involved?
The answer to your question is that a hostile work environment arises when speech or conduct creates an intimidating or demeaning environment or atmosphere, and it affects your performance. So when it's affecting your performance, you should speak out about it, and it's something that you don't have to put up with. Men or women don't have to put up with a hostile work environment. It's just not the way the workforce is today.
Now, if we have a frum woman who has a higher standard than normal society, we have higher sensitivities. For example, if you say to a woman at work, which is probably a fairly common statement, oh, your dress is very nice, or you got a new hairdo or something, and a frum woman may not appreciate that statement, may not appreciate certain speech or interactions or touching, which would be the norm in a secular work environment. At what point does she say, I've got to get used to the lower level of interactions? It's not in the standard that I deem acceptable, but that's the standard out there. can we maintain our standards, or are we going to start complaining because we are on a higher standard than other people in the workplace?
So let me just say that there's a big difference between saying, nice dress or nice dress. Like there's a difference. The words are the same, but there could be a different nuance to the way a person is saying it. And so, hostile work environment situations sometimes are not easy to recognize. And so I wouldn't be so quick to say that some of the things that frum women experience are so different than other women. And even though we do have different sensibilities, generally I would say that 99.99% of the times that women feel uncomfortable, they should feel uncomfortable and should try to bring it to the manager's attention if they can, and if they feel comfortable. If not, they can go to their HR department or a trusted colleague to sense check them. But just because somebody says you have a nice hairdo or a nice dress, it could be said in a way that really is inappropriate. And that's something that's situational and have to deal with on a case-by-case basis, I guess I would say, Ari.
Mm-hmm. Now, we had a woman on, a family therapist named Elisheva Liss, and we were talking about both the secular workplace and also the Hamish workplace, the frum, Orthodox workplace. And she said that there is a problem. It's not a one-off problem of either emotional and physical infidelity. Is that the type of thing, because it's mutual relationships that develop over time, that HR does not hear about, that stays on the radar screen, or does HR sometimes get involved in that type of thing?
So I have a story. I hope you don't mind. I had a woman once come to me saying that her direct supervisor gave her a bad rating, and the reason why was because she was rebuffing his advances. And it happened that a day or two later, a friend of mine came to me and said that she was waiting outside of the lactation room for 10 or 15 minutes and saw this couple come out of this lactation room and didn't really understand why this couple was coming out. And it happened to be this woman who was complaining that her supervisor was giving her this bad rating. So, long story short, another HR person who was using the new mother's room, the lactation room, had seen the same couple coming out and saw on this woman's hand, or I think wrist, a heart with her initials and the supervisor's initials. So there was like a tattoo thing on her as a heart, and it was clear that this woman and her supervisor were carrying on in the lactation room completely inappropriately, as evidenced by a couple of people that I spoke to. And so I went to the division head of this particular business, and we found out that the relationship was consensual. I guess people seem to know. Completely inappropriate on the part of the supervisor. And even though the woman lied to me about rebuffing his advances, it was an affair gone sour. And, she was complaining about the fact that he was retaliating because the affair had gone sour. So these situations are really complicated. There's complicated solutions. But relationships, while they inevitably happen in the workplace, many companies have really strict guidelines today about not having relationships with your direct line or even in your department or division, because these things happen quite a bit. We work a lot. There's not a lot of places to go. There's a lot of young people in the workforce, but it's very important that you not have relationships within your direct line, or for sure with supervisors. That's a big no-no.
Are there studies on the propensity towards having relationships in the workplace as a result of working closely together? Is there something that it's just natural that it happens?
There are. I wouldn't be equipped to quote them right now, but yeah, I think that relationships do happen quite a bit in the workplace. As compared to before, I'm not sure, but I think most people will tell you that, we're in a 24/7 work environment with technology. There's a lot of studies going on in terms of social capital and how important networking is and how important it is to trust your colleagues. So people are becoming more, they're bonding more because of the way the workforce is going today. So I would say yes, there are quite a few relationships that happen in the workplace.
Okay, the risks are higher than before technology, I guess. Let me just change gears for a little bit. Somebody recently told me a story about his wife who was working at a large publisher. I'm not going to mention the name of the publisher, but she left, and then she found out that two men that she had worked with were fired for being inappropriate with women. And she said she did not believe it, knowing those two men. There is no way they did anything wrong. They were mentions, they were proper, they were appropriate. Are there times that a man does get blamed for something that's not really inappropriate, that he's just, a woman thought he did something wrong and he really did nothing wrong? And if so, how do you handle that as the man?
So I worry about, men, especially the frum men. I think today frum men are confused on how, men in general are confused about how to act. And sometimes they don't really understand what can be said, what can't be said, what's a demeaning comment or behavior. Like, for example, I recently heard a young frum man who graduated from college and entered the workforce say that he didn't believe women, and particularly women with children, should work outside the home. So we may not think that's inappropriate, but we talked earlier about hostile work environment. So even though I don't think this young man thought there was anything inappropriate about that view, and he was just voicing his view, others may think it's demeaning, like other coworkers may think it's demeaning. And we talked earlier about a man who was not aware of his behavior in terms of touching legs or thighs. He didn't know that he did it. We just have to make sure we don't assume that you talk the same way in the workplace as you do in your yeshiva or other places. You may be able to talk an acceptable way in a frum world. And we, as frum Jews, know how powerful words can be, and make sure that you're uber conscious of how you're speaking and acting to people, I think, inside and outside the workplace. I'll give you really another good story that happened to me in a prior position. Obviously, all these stories didn't happen to me in this particular position, but this one happened where one of my HR coordinators, a very good worker, she happened to be African American. She asked me why Jewish men who are religious throw things at Black people. And I asked her what in the world she was talking about. And she said that a couple of months prior, she had wanted to be nice, so she gave the key to the lactation room. I don't know what it is with lactation rooms, but she gave the key to the lactation room.
The only private place. The only private place to do what you want.
To this Jewish man to pray in the afternoon. And, she got to know me a little bit and my religious stuff, so she wanted to be nice and gave this Jewish man the key to the lactation room so he could pray in the afternoon. And she said to me, every time he finished and he came back, he threw the keys at her. And she's like, so what religious rule is it that says that religious men throw things at Black people? And I figured out it was because this guy didn't want to hand the key to her. And I explained to her that that's what it probably was. I was really sorry for the miscommunication. She probably shouldn't give out the key to people, even though she's trying to be nice. It's really reserved for lactation, but that's another story. But she said, okay. And I went back to the man, this frum man, and I explained, what occurred, and explained how his actions had been misinterpreted. And he really needed to explain to her what happened. First of all, number one, because I didn't want people to think that religious men throw things at Black people. And two, I wanted to protect the company because, he was creating this hostile work environment. He wasn't throwing the keys at her. He was just handing them back in a way that he thought was acceptable from his religious point of view. Sadly, when I explained this to him, he was really annoyed at me. He said, I don't really have to explain my religion. And we went back and forth about it. But it's like one of those things where he really didn't mean to throw the key. And it's just, very misinterpreted. I don't know what appropriate and inappropriate is. What's inappropriate to one person could be something appropriate to another. So, that's kind of long story short, Ari.
Amazing. Okay, let me change gears yet again. This is a big area. There's a big push in workplaces, not only in the United States and Israel, also of team building a team. And in Israel, we call it gibush, bringing everyone into a cohesive manner. What's the basis and the need for doing that nowadays? It didn't exist 20, 30 years ago.
So this is one of my favorite topics, so you really have to you have to stop me if I'm going on too long. But companies are transforming themselves today. They need to be responsive. They need to be agile. Organizations are suited for the age of disruption because we have to enable individuals to connect and create across networks. So, it's the best way for any company to unleash creative potential from within. And having relationships or being linked to social capital of an organization is really becoming very, very important in many organizations. It's not like, you send the paper in and the fax and then you wait a week. It's like things are happening, and a person has to be agile, especially in larger companies. So there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of relationships, like we talked about earlier in our conversation. And intimacy and making sure that you're building up trust and fellowship is really important in today's workplace, because this social capital is just important and maybe more important than human capital, or the skills that you're bringing to the table. So cooperation, collaboration amongst groups is critical to drive business growth in today's workplace. And I guess, how does a frum person build up trust with other colleagues without sacrificing values? And my advice is to establish personal relationships by sharing personal things or doing things that are more par or vanilla. So you have to build up trust with your colleagues. There's a lot more collaboration than there was in the past, and a person needs to make sure that they build up trust with their colleagues to foster collaboration. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So if we have events in a bar, we have everyone's going out to the beach day, and we have the frum woman or man going out on beach day, or museum day, which is more innocuous, or playing football together, and the woman is supposed to be playing football, or rafting day, or the escape room, leaving aside a yichud problem. And we have the frum person who feels the need to participate somehow, that it's going to assist in getting your raise and being part of the team, and you feel the pressure to be part of that unit. But on the other hand, we are different. We are separate. Am levadad yishkon. How does a frum person balance those imperatives of participating but being different?
It's a really good question, and I think the answer and the key is to building those relationships. So I'll answer you in a roundabout way, in an example that I had. Last week, I was at a meeting in the Midwest that I led. It was leaders across the country. I didn't really know them that well, and at breakfast they were telling everybody what they had done over the weekend and about whatever they did. And I actually don't share too much about my family, and I kind of try to keep that boundary. I definitely didn't want to tell them about the 24 hours of cooking I did, because I was going to be away the week before Shavuos, so that wouldn't have made me feel any more comfortable. So when I got up, I started to talk about the meeting, and then I said, well, I recently got, I was talking about this Invisalign that I got. I got these braces because my dentist said that if I didn't get the Invisalign, then I may lose my teeth when I'm 70, and I wouldn't look so great when I'm 60. And these people in the audience, they thought it was hilarious. Like, it was a personal detail that I shared. I was intimate with them. I didn't have to tell them about Shavuos or my wig or anything like that. I mean, but it was personal, and it was a way of bonding. And it's really important for people to find out and be transparent enough so that you're not a complete stranger to people, and share just enough so that people will know that you're a person and you can bond with them. That's why we have these events. So whether or not you go to an escape room, I mean, I've been to escape rooms. I think the most important thing here is to make sure that you build trust and bonds with people that you work with in a completely appropriate way that feels right for you. Another example I have is a good friend of mine who's really way firmer than me. She's a CTO at a large multinational. She recently married off a daughter, and I noticed at this wedding there weren't any of her colleagues, and she ran this huge, department, and she said she just didn't feel comfortable. But she admires them, she respects them. I admire my colleagues, I respect my colleagues, but sometimes we just have to know the line that we cross or don't cross. It's really an individual, situational type of thing.
But how could it impact the person, frum person, man, woman, who says, I don't feel comfortable going to these events. I'm not going to attend anything, any of these extra work events? So
I would say extra work. I'm not sure it's extra work. I think that sometimes these events, for example, my company had just when IPO went public, and they had a big party to celebrate that. I was happy and honored to go to that party, and it didn't compromise my frum values. I really feel like every person the key to success in the workplace is to make a Kiddush Hashem every day, and you have to act with dignity, honesty, work hard, treat people fairly, honestly, and be indispensable in creating value for your company. I'm not sure it hangs on a canoe trip. I think that's something that somebody has to decide for herself. If you can bond with your people and trust with them and say, hey, I don't feel comfortable going, but here's what I can do for you, I think that may be a good aid. So.
Mm-hmm. So it's trying to. So what my experience was is trying to choose the most innocuous events that they had and avoiding the ones that were more problematic from a halachic or a shkafic perspective. And when you go to these events, what I would try to do is be really seen. In other words, my wife and I, we would call it work the table. So if she was invited also for spouses, we would be sure to go table by table and be seen by everyone and then leave. But
I think that's great. I interpreted your question to be more like, what if escape rooms are pretty innocuous, but what if you go to a club, where there's dancing, like there's things that are like really on the cusp of being, you really shouldn't be going there, or a church or something that you really shouldn't be doing. But yeah, if you're going to go, but don't go for a long time. Do what you feel comfortable. But like I said, I don't know that it's so much about the event per se. I think it's about making sure that you're a real person to people at work and making sure that you're authentic and that people trust you. And then I think things will fall into place. That's my view.
Very nice. Very nice. I'll just end with a quick story. There was Rav Palm had a student, and that student, a former student, and the former student told his son, who was about to go work in an accounting firm in New York, if you have any questions about the workplace, go ask Rav Palm. So the boy who was going to be working in the accounting firm, his boss was non-observant but Jewish, and everyone else was non-Jews. He said, I don't have any questions. I have one question. So he went to Rav Palm and he asked Rav Palm, should I wear a yarmulke? Should I wear a yarmulke? No one knows what it is. No one else is observant there. So Rav Palm told him, if the condition of your working there is that you can't wear a yarmulke, don't work there. You need to wear a yarmulke. But to be successful, you need to be three things. Number one, you need to be the hardest worker. In other words, that doesn't have to be the hardest worker, because we're never going to be the hardest worker. There are people that work all the time, 7 days a week. So that's not going to happen that we're going to be the absolute hardest worker, but when on the job, don't waste time, be focused, and be there for the company. So hardest worker, you have to be the friendliest. You have to be friendly to everyone. You have to say shalom aleichem, aleichem shalom, good morning. So it's a hard worker, friendly, and the most honest person. And if you fill those three requirements, then you're going to make a Kiddush Hashem and you'll be successful on the job.
Nice. Beautiful.
A good lesson to remember. Well, Mrs. Brillerman, really appreciate you joining us. This has been eye-opening and incredibly helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye. In wrapping up the show, I thought it would be helpful to hear audio clips from 3 women who discuss the importance of setting gedarim for ourselves when we are in the workplace that we will not, under any circumstances, compromise on, and in addition, to discuss the importance of making a Kiddush Hashem in the workplace.
You definitely have to have gedarim. I mean, you have to have your own self-imposed. You have to be strong. You have to be a strong person. You have to have a rub and ask. You have to. You have to. Have lines that you absolutely do not cross. Whatever the situation is. Let's say Shabbos, I will never leave past X o'clock. And just if it means walking out of a meeting, if it means whatever it means, then you just do that. That some things are just not options.
I don't mean to underplay it. I don't mean to make it sound easy, because I don't think it's easy, but I do always say it's simple. Like, the rules are simple. You're not gonna compromise. This is who you are. You're not gonna apologize, but you're not gonna be entitled. You're just going to be great at what you do and try to make people like you and just be who you are.
I think instead of just seeing it as like a scary situation, and actually, for me personally, has been incredibly inspiring. I think the opportunity for Kiddush Hashem and just knowing if you're going into that environment, like if you just present yourself as somebody who's just like a joyful, happy person who genuinely loves the work they do, who treats people with respect, the opportunity for people to perceive you and therefore perceive all Jews in a positive way is tremendous.
Joining us now is Rav Yisachar Friend. I am not sure how to give an introduction to somebody who does not need an introduction, but suffice it to say, Rabbi Friend, I remember 30 years ago listening to your tapes, the old-fashioned no MP3s, walking around for years listening to your tapes. I also remember I had a chasana in St. Louis probably about 25, 30 years ago, and the chasana was on a Sunday night, and all of the people who came in for the chasana went to your shiur Sunday morning. I think we were probably more excited about hearing you in St. Louis than even going to the chasana. So it is a privilege and a pleasure to have you joining us on the show.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Wasserman. At the risk of sounding that you scratched my back, I'll scratch your back. Let me say that Rabbi Wasserman and his work, both through his writings and orally, is doing a tremendous schus for Klal Yisrael in areas that are extremely sensitive, and they require a sensitive person. They require a person that knows what's going on out there, and Rabbi Wasserman fills all of those requirements, and he should have a lot of hatzlacha with all of his avodas hakodesh, particularly his new book, which I've had a chance to at least peruse, and it's a vital work, and it's something that every woman who is working outside of the home, which at this point in our history includes almost all women, it's vital reading, it's important reading.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Friend. Rabbi Friend, this is the culmination of the show. We've saved you for last, and we've talked about a number of issues, challenges women encounter in the both secular and the frum Hamish workplace, and we love to hear your thoughts, some chizuk from you that we can take it and imbue that into our daily lives.
Okay, I heard a brief overview of that which has already been said by some very, very choshev people, some big Talmidei Chachamim, and as I told Rabbi Wasserman, I think anything that I say is rather superfluous, but the rule is ein mesarvin l'godol, you don't turn down a person, a choshev, a person, a godol, and therefore in that spirit I'm agreeing to say a few words, but I can't imagine that I'm going to say something that perhaps hasn't been said already. My very few thoughts are that you see over and over again that Chazal really knew what they were talking about, especially when it comes to human beings. And they're very attuned to the way human beings act and human beings work, whenever you buy some kind of device today, so that comes with an instruction manual. The question is, where's the instruction manual for human beings? How do we know what to do? How do we work? The answer is that there is an instruction manual to human beings, and that's the Torah itself. And that's not only the Torah itself, the Torah Shebichsav, Torah Shebal Peh, but it's the whole corpus of the Divrei Chazal and how they gave us the means to understand ourselves, and whether this was extended and expanded by the Chachmei HaMusar and the Musar movement started by Yisrael Salanter, or whether it's in the Teres HaChasidus, but all this is to give us insights into how human beings act, what makes us tick. I've always was on an area that's not included in this particular program, but if you see Chazal, how they structured Hilchos Avelus, and how a person has to go through the process of grief and how he gets through that, you see that Chazal were very attuned to human nature, and that's the way it is not only in Hilchos Avelus but in all areas of life. So Chazal told us a rule called Ein Apotropos L'Arayos. which means when it comes to inyane arayas of interactions between men and women, and the whole parsha of how we relate to members of the opposite sex, the rule of thumb is there are no guarantees. Ein apotropos la'arayos. Now, apotropos is like an overseer or a guarantor. And when it comes to inyane arayos and relations between men and women, there are no guarantees. And no one can ever say, I'm above that, or I'm beyond that. And no matter how old they may be, or how choshev they may be, or whatever it is, everyone is in the same boat. And Chazal knew how men and women act. They knew the attraction between men and women, even attractions that sometimes to us don't make any sense on the face of it. But that is human nature. So that's why this program and the work that Rabbi Wasserman is doing is extremely vital, and it applies to everybody. No person can say, this is not for me. This is for somebody else, but not for me. I'm very impressed with all people, Vice President Mike Pence. Mike Pence is a very observant Christian, and that's why, for instance, he's very anti-abortion, etc., etc. Mike Pence has said that he does not go to dinner with a woman unless his wife is there. Now, this is a non-Jew. This is a person that does not have a Shulchan Aruch. This is not a person that has a Chazal. But Mike Pence apparently realizes what human beings are all about. And therefore, I will, you have this all the time in the business world. We have to meet for dinner. So sometimes it's just two people, a man and a woman. He would not do that. The Vice President of the United States, he will not do that, because these are his gedorim. He doesn't know what the word gedorim means. He doesn't know the whole concept of asu siyog l'Torah, but he realizes that these interactions between men and women can sometimes be a very, very slippery slope, and things that may start out as very innocuous and very casual, but this is what Chazal say, Ein apotropos la'arayos. You never know how it can progress. Especially in the workplace. A guy comes home from work. His wife, even if she works, but now she's home. It's supper time. It's dinner time. And this kid's crying, and this kid's complaining that he can't do his homework. And we know what a house looks like, especially supper time, bedtime, etc., etc., etc. His wife has had it. She's had it. She's may have been working for whatever it is, maybe 8 hours. She comes home. She has to she's not in the best of moods. And she's not, may I say, looking her best. And a lot of the times that we are with our spouses, it is not the most optimum time. It's not the time that we're at our best. We're stressed out. We're tired. We have all these distractions. On the other hand, the workplace, everybody's on their best behavior. Everybody is dressed well. Everybody is they look their best, they act their best because they know that they're at work. And a person can think to himself, my wife is always complaining, or my husband's always complaining, and here I have this person that's pleasant, that's helpful, that's cooperative. And there's another factor. They talk about wartime buddies. The relationships that you refer, that you create during war times, those are the strongest relationships that there are. Why? Because you went through stress with them. You went through difficulties with them. You were there for each other. At the same time, lahavdal, I can say the best relationships, the best friends that I've had over my lifetime are the people that I went to yeshiva with. I can have a friend that I was yeshiva with 50 years ago. I don't see him there very often, but there's a bond there because we went to the wars together. And when you have a situation when men or women are working, for instance, on a project, and there's a lot of stress, and there's deadlines, and you were there for her, and she was there for you, that creates a type of bond that you don't have in many situations in life. And out of those type of situations, sometimes, a relationship can grow. You didn't set out to make this relationship, but by virtue of the fact that the circumstances that you were in, this bond was created, and that bond can lead to other things as well. And that's why, not that I bring Uriah from Mike Pence, lahavdal, but that's why everybody needs his gedorim. He needs his lines that he will not cross. He has to do this beforehand. He can't do this afterwards. This can't be post facto. This has to be preemptive. And there are certain things that you won't do. There are certain things that you will always keep. And come what may, you're going to you're not going to cross that line. And what happens, unfortunately, is it is human nature that with the erosion of time, and as time passes by, so you become not as strong as you were in the beginning. And that what you thought, well, I would never do this, but okay, time passes by. That is why, for instance, Rabbi Wasserman reminded me of the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which I will not go into the intricacies of the Gemara, but suffice it to say that Shaul HaMelech thought that his daughter was not halachically married. And the truth of the matter is, this is a machlokas without getting into it, whether she was married or not, but practically speaking, other than from Shaul HaMelech's opinion, she was halachically married. And she was put in the same bedroom with someone named Palti ben Laish. Now imagine being in the same bedroom with another woman, and you're not allowed to touch her. You're not really, he was forced into this situation because the king told him, Shaul HaMelech told him, listen, this is your wife. Now Palti ben Laish knew, this is not my wife. It's actually David HaMelech's wife. And he knew that he'd be in this situation indefinitely. So what did he do? Says the Gemara, no atzcher bekarka. He went there and stuck a sword in between the two beds, and he says kolaisi b'dover say yidaker becherv. Anyone that goes ahead and crosses that line should be stabbed, and therefore that sword stood between the two beds for the entire time that they were together. Now, as Rav Chaim Shmulevitz points out, what's the problem? You can always take out the sword. The answer is that sword was not just because something that it was an offense, in a literal offense, but that sword symbolized that this is how I felt in the beginning when I knew what this was about, when I knew without any question that this is wrong. And that sword is going to remind me indefinitely that this is how I felt then, and that's the way it really is. And therefore, that was the purpose of that sword. And everybody has to have these symbolic swords in the ground and say, this is the way I'm going to act. This is the way I acted when I didn't have negias, when I didn't have passion, when I didn't have when my Yetzer Hara was not weak. And that's what a person has to go ahead when he goes into these situations. I just want to end with the words of the Rambam, which are always very inspiring to me. The Rambam writes in Perek Hey Milchus Yisedi HaTeira about what's considered a Chil Hashem and what's considered a Kiddush Hashem. Now, we all have our definitions of Kiddush Hashem and Chil Hashem, but here the Rambam tells us that Kol ha'over midaita b'lo yones halachas mikol mitzvah samuras beter b'shat nefesh lahachis haresim mechalas Hashem. If a person does an avera, he's not forced to, but he does an avera just because I don't care. I don't care what God says. Besides the avera, haresim mechalas Hashem, that's the greatest desecration of Hashem's name. Because you're in effect saying, I don't care what you say, God. I'm going to do what I want. That's the negative. And then listen to what the Ram says as follows. V'chein kol ha'peresh me'avera. If a person abstains from doing an avera, or also a mitzvah, or you do a mitzvah, now listen to these words. Loi mipnei dover ba'olam. For no other reason. Loi pachad v'lo yira. Not out of fear, not out of fright, v'lo levakish kovet, and not for covet reasons. You do what is right to do, or you refrain from doing what's wrong, not because of covet, not because of pachad, not because of yira, not out of fright, ela b'pnei habayre baruch hu, simply because God said so. And then the Ram says, Kimeniyas Yosef HaTzadik Atzmai Me'ishes Rabbi. Just like Yosef HaTzadik was there with the wife of Potiphar, and everything said for him to commit and to succumb, but he didn't, says the Ram Harazeh Harezeh Mekadesh Hashem. That's a Kiddush Hashem. The biggest Kiddush Hashem is that no one's going to see, and no one's going to know. And you'd have no ulterior motive to do or not to do this. But you do this simply because this is what the Rebbeinu Shalom said I should do. That says the Ram, Harezeh Mekadesh Hashem. And perhaps the reason the Rambam marshals the proof from Yosef HaTzadik is because the Rambam is telling us that just like we have the concept of Mesiras Nefesh from Avraham Avinu, and we have things from all the Ovis, we have something from Yosef HaTzadik as well. We have something in our spiritual DNA from Yosef. And that is the ability that when no one is watching, there's no support system, there's nothing stopping you, no one's ever going to know. I'm never going to see my family again in Yosef's mind. Just like Yosef had the ability to do that, that's Yosef's legacy to each and every one of us. The ability to do what's right and not to do what's wrong for no other reason other because the Rebbeinu Shalom said so. So I hope that everyone will get from this program chizuk and awareness and strengthening of their resolve, and it all accrues to the credit of Rabbi Ari Wasserman. Kol Tov, and have a gesunte summer.
Rabbi Franz, thank you so much for joining us. This is quite a way to end the show. Yesher Koach, thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. Kol Tov, Yesher Koach.